So Councilman Waring is the only one we're waiting on now?
No,
Yes, sir.
Councilmember Gregory is on. We're just waiting on Councilmember Waring.
I'm here, Mitch.
Okay. All right, if you give Councilman Waring one more minute,
Okay.
then we'll get started.
We are.
He'll catch up.
Good afternoon, everybody. How y'all doing?
Hey,
Yeah,
Mayor.
how's it going?
Hey guys,
Fine,
how are
Mayor.
y'all?
Doing great.
You in cabin?
Guys, we've got to be careful. That weird strain has hit South Carolina.
I saw that.
Yeah, I heard it.
We made national
Heard
news,
about it.
not the kind you'd
Yeah,
like.
I heard it.
Right.
I tell you.
I imagine
be
it's
very-
all over the place and people just don't know it yet.
I think so too.
Yeah, well, because both of those two cases, neither had traveled recently.
No?
No, neither.
By the way, Terry Seabrook is hospitalized.
Oh, no.
Yes,
But she is?
yes.
Sorry to hear that.
And just so y'all know, we're up on YouTube.
Okay.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Okay. Well, Councilman Waring haven't come in yet, I don't believe, but we're gonna get started. We got a couple of things to go to. That might be him now, huh? But the time now is 4:33. And I'd like to call the Community Development meeting to order. And I would like to ask Councilwoman Jackson, would you give us a short invocation, please, if you may?
Yes, sir, Chairman. Thank you. Let's pray.
Thank
Lord,
you.
we lift you up today. We ask your favor for this body of decision makers and presenters and the business of your city, and especially as we choose and are trying to be as vigilant and persistent and ever mindful of serving the community and especially the least. So help us to have that goal in mind as we do your business. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Also, the Mayor Pro Tem for this year, Councilwoman Jackson. I just want to make sure I put that in there.
Thank you.
Okay, we have public participation. I know we have some people from the public that's going to be talking on some of the items. Ms. Johnson, do you have any?
No, sir. Megan, would you just give the
Just
names of all of
names.
the persons that are with your team?
Right.
Yes.
That are,
Mhm. We have Scott Parker here, Tom Bradford, and Ron Owens, and they're with the
Okay.
Friends of the Low Country Lowline.
thank you.
Thank you. I just want that for the minutes. Now, can I get
Yes,
approval
sir.
for
And
the
I don't
minutes?
think there are any
Let's
more
defer.
members of the public.
Okay, thank you much. The minutes have been deferred, so we're gonna go right on to new business. And I'm gonna ask Ms. Johnson, she can start it off for me because most of the things she'll be talking about anyway. So she can take it over from there.
Yes, sir. And Councilmember Mitchell, I'd actually like to defer to the mayor so he can make any opening comments. And following that, I think Alan Davis, who heads up the city's design center, will take us through the list. Mayor?
Well, Mr. Chairman and committee members, if I may, just looking at the agenda, could we go ahead and allow the folks who signed up to make a public comment to proceed?
Sure.
That was the first thing on our agenda, and I think
That's right.
they wanted to make a short few comments, and then could proceed with Alan's presentation, which is the first item of new business on the agenda, the Cooper River Bridge redevelopment area.
Okay, so I'll give each one of them about 2 minutes, if you may.
All right. And who did you say had signed up, Gianna?
I believe Mr. Bradford is going to speak on behalf of the Friends of the Lowline.
I see.
Mr. Parker,
Actually,
I'm sorry, Parker,
Mr.
Scott Parker.
So, yes, so if you're ready, I'll go ahead and start.
Yes.
Sure.
And I want to start by first saying thank you very much for this opportunity to come before you, Chairman Mitchell and members of the Community Development Committee. And what I want to do is talk a little bit about the low line. And I know the first item on your agenda is to consider TIF funding. You have a long list with a lot of very worthy projects on that list. And projects certainly that city staff and you all have worked a long time to make happen. But I wanted to present a few points to emphasize why the low line should receive your utmost consideration this evening. So I'll start. So first of all, as you know, City Council ratified the master plan for the low line last month in your December meeting. So I know that you all understand the very profound social, environmental, and economic benefits of the low line. One of the things that we don't talk a lot about is the last one, which is the economic benefits. So I want to touch on that just briefly. Some of the council members participated in the session learning about the Beltline in Atlanta. And I think if we look at other projects like the Beltline, like the High Line, like the 606, clearly these projects generate significant economic activity. They create jobs and they create private sector investment. And this is really important for our city during these uncertain economic times. The next thing I want to talk about is the Friends have partnered with the city of Charleston over the last 7 years to work on the low line and to really bring us to the point where we are this evening. And during that time, the Friends has directly donated $4 million to this effort. And we have set our sights on raising an additional $12 million going forward. And so that's real important. And what it means is that your investment of TIF dollars, your investment of public money into this project will be leveraged to generate very significant private donations and private money that will be brought to bear to make our city better. The next point I want to talk about is that we have identified a phase 1 construction project. And that construction project is what we call Lowline Park. And I think Megan has an image that we can look at. So Lowline Park is located just north of Line Street. And we chose that location for a number of reasons, but most importantly, it will directly serve the West Side neighborhood and the East Side neighborhood. It will also serve the new Low Country Low Line public housing project that is on your agenda for discussion later this evening. So that's where we'll start. It's centrally located. It serves some neighborhoods that traditionally haven't not seen a lot of investment. So we're very excited about that. We see our phase 1 extending all the way to Hughesy Street. We see it making connections, obviously, to Meeting Street and to King Street and to the surrounding neighborhoods. Also in our phase 1, we've earmarked a number of improvements up and down the entire length of the low line so that each of the neighborhoods that is along the edges of the low line would understand some benefits from this initial TIF investment and initial investment by the Friends of the Low Line. So we're seeing a path that would go all the way from the Low Line Park up to Mount Pleasant Street. We're seeing some new sports courts, perhaps community gardens, perhaps small gathering spaces that would be included. So the phase 1 construction would be a very significant addition to our community. The next point I want to make is that we're ready to start now. We have made a commitment. One of our board members has challenged us to start construction in 2021. So we're prepared to break ground this year. And what that means as well is that the ribbon cutting for phase 1 would happen next year. So we're ready to make this happen. An investment of TIF dollars here will generate a very quick return on that investment.
All righty. Is that it?
No, sir. A couple more. I'm the only one talking, so if I can have
Oh.
their minutes, then we'll be good. The next one is that the Friends is prepared to handle the project. So we'll take it from beginning to end, which means we're not going to place any additional burdens on city staff. We've worked very closely with the city on this, and we know how busy everybody is. So we'll be able to take this on and make it happen. The next thing is that between now and the initial ribbon cutting, we'll be working with the Parks Conservancy and perhaps other organizations to establish a plan to so that the low line can be operated and maintained without placing additional burdens on the city to enable that to happen. So to conclude, we're ready to start. We're ready to take this project through completion. We've already raised significant money. We're ready to raise more. And we're here to tell you that we really appreciate the fact that the city staff has identified a $7.5 million number for the low line. And I want you to know that the Friends is committed to make that investment of TIF dollars work in a very profound way for our city. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
So was there any other public comments?
No.
So if we could ask Alan Davis to share some work of staff, and I'll just give a quick preface, Mr. Chairman, that
All right.
we have a lot of demands in the Cooper River Bridge District, 5th District, but fortunately, the district is performing and allows us to issue an additional bond this year. And so what I did, I knew that the low line, that this could be a potential funding source to kind of jumpstart it and get it started. But with all fairness, of course, we have to look at our other needs in the district. Of course, this wouldn't be the only potential funding source for us to help get the low line jump started. But and Alan, I don't know, do you have also the figures of the first issuance of the bond, just to remind the committee members what we've done to date? I think the first issuance a year and a half, 2 years ago was $12 million. I thought maybe we'd review that first, just to remind folks what we've done, and then go to the list of the potential projects.
Yes, sir. I do have that. I'm looking for it now in my files. Just give me a couple of seconds to make sure I've got the right one.
And if
Okay.
not, I've also forwarded it to Jennifer, and we've emailed it to the members of the committee as well.
Okay. And if you don't have that, I could just kind of summarize it on the verbally. But
My Adobe Acrobat's being a little slow, so please feel free to go ahead and start doing that, sir.
And I can-
Mayor, I have it available.
I can,
So while they're pulling that up, in
There it is.
broad categories under affordable housing, of the initial $12 million bond we issued, about a fourth of it, or just a little over $3 million went to affordable housing projects. And most all of that, correct me if I'm wrong, Gianna, is firmly committed and will be spent shortly if it hadn't been spent already. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Yes, sir, that's correct. This year will be the year where those expenditures come to bear.
That's right. So the next big category was drainage and stormwater, and total various projects were $4,750,000. Now, to be honest with you, we have a balance, so to speak, for future construction. It's almost like we're saving a little money, like we did for the low battery seawall, until Matt Fountain and his team completes the recommendations and design and engineering of specific projects. But we've got that, AECom just completed their survey of the area. And so that's a work in progress, but that's money that probably won't get spent for another year or two. The next category was pedestrian safety of about $450,000. We started the Brigade Street project this week, and the Morrison Drive project should be starting relatively soon. And then lastly, most of the rest of the money went to St. Julian Divine, and that was a little over $3 million. And we got a little bit holding over for some improvements at Hampstead Square, which we want to leave in place. But just to let you know, we do have a balance of $550,000 from this first issuance that would be available for us to allocate to projects, in addition to thinking about the $12 million that we would issue this year, or estimated at this point. So Alan, now if you go to the potential products, what I asked staff to do, Mr. Chairman, was to really survey all the other department heads and think about our needs for the district, not just this coming year, but over the long haul. And let me share with the good news, Mr. Chairman and my colleagues, is that even though right now we believe we can issue $12 million this year, the district is performing very well. And we've had independent estimates that over the next 6 years or so, that the district could generate $35 to $40 million for infrastructure improvements in this district. So some good things to come. So Alan, take it away for the potential projects.
You're muted, Alan.
I apologize. Thank you very much, sir. It's been a very interesting and rewarding experience working with the Cooper River Bridge cross-sector collaboration team, a team of city staff that's represented by various departments that deal with the built environment. We meet on a regular basis to implement projects in the area, focus on design in the area, and there's a lot of other projects, as this committee is familiar with, that team is responsible for bringing to fruition. As part of my work with the Low Line, it's been great working with them to produce the Low Line Master Plan. I also work with the Cooper River Bridge cross-sector collaboration team, and we wanted to be sure that the Low Line and other potential TIF projects as part of this bond and future bonds are all accounted for, that we're making sure that we're accounting for all the needs of the entire district for which the bond was created. So we undertook a prioritization exercise just to familiarize everyone and anyone in the public who is watching. The Cooper River Bridge TIF district is located generally north of the east side. In fact, it contains part of the east side, and it's sort of in the middle of the peninsula near the Ravenel Bridge. A lot of the prioritization that we went through was actually turned out to be very extensive and had categories relative to the original TIF goals from the original ordinance, the ability to implement projects, whether or not we have existing or potential stakeholder buy-in. Equity was a big component of this prioritization, and then planning adoption, is it mentioned or endorsed in an adopted plan, for example. I mentioned the cross-sector collaboration team, and these are really the four main departments that represent that team represents. So you have everyone that's involved with the built environment. All of these categories were weighted. I spent months sending them out to everybody and collecting everybody's input on this based on their project knowledge. And then we came up with a prioritization. We also allocated a cost estimate. This is a ballpark cost estimate. We did not have time to get the detailed cost estimate for each of these projects. We think we hit it pretty close to the mark. We also added some general timeframes in terms of the project readiness. We reported that to you, sir, as you know. This is the resultant prioritization in terms of the ranking. I got $60 million at least worth of needs in the entire area. So certainly a lot more work left to do in the district. Just for everyone's reference, I do have a map available. I'm not going to go through that now, but as you can see, just generally most of these projects fall within the actual Cooper River Bridge TIF district, and that includes phase 1 of the low line falls within the district. And then Mayor, are you ready for me to show the summarized prioritization from today's exercise?
Well, let's go back one and just see if anybody has any questions or comments. I mean, that's a lot to take in. The fact you just showed a combination of $60 million on one page, and maybe just a little more time on this and what all went into this.
Sure, yes, sir. And I'm happy to explain any of these projects to the best of my knowledge. They come from a variety of departments, and you know, so I'll call on my colleagues to explain if I can't fully explain them. Would you like me to go item by item, or just allow people to take the time to read them?
What's the pleasure, Mr. Chairman?
Once the everyone is looking at it, they can, if they have a question about one particular item, they can go through. Just to go through one by one, I think we're going to be here all day. I think we just need to look at it very carefully, because it's a lot of money, $60 million. And
now of course we're talking over at least a 10-year
period.
10-year period of time.
Let me ask if anyone on the committee have any questions first about what they're seeing so far,
I believe
what they have heard.
I believe Councilmember Jackson and Councilwoman Jackson have their hands up.
Okay, Councilman Jackson, and then after is Councilman Saccharin. Okay.
Thanks. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Davis. It's really great to try to jump into y'all's brains about the prioritization strategy. And I would think it would be very educational for us to see a little more detail about that as you could send it, just, your point categories and things like that, because I think this is a tool that we really do need to use, as we have so much, to be deciding about all over the city and the region. But I'm just looking at the two different major investments in stormwater and water management improvements, let's call it. So you lump together, I guess, general stormwater improvements as a very high priority with a long shelf life, essentially. And I'm wondering, and then the Dutch Dialogues water management open space east of America Street is called out as its own separate improvement. Is that because we're hoping it will be a short time frame, or we know more specifically that it's a holistic design? Or can you just explain how come those two things are separate, and what was your thinking about that?
Absolutely, that's a really good question, and they really should be merged, because we think holistically about all of the stormwater needs in the entire district. The stormwater department has undertaken a study with AECOM to study the Cooper and Jackson drainage basins, which encompass the majority of this area. They're starting to come up with a collection of projects right now. They've done a lot of modeling on that, and so what they're showing is that, and not necessarily $15 million, but potentially up to $25 million worth of needs in the area. And so we don't quite know exactly where that number is going to fall, but we know that there are a lot of stormwater work is still needed in the district, and that was widely mentioned in the original ordinance. The Dutch Dialogues open space east of America Street is a standalone project because simply it came from a different department and division. That came from my shop as a way to implement the recommendations of the Dutch Dialogues in that area that's currently composed of surface parking. So it really just Matt Fountain and I work more closely together, and they just categorize those projects a little bit differently. That's the only reason why that one's called out differently.
And don't forget, we have about a $3 million balance from the first issuance as well. It's not counted here.
Okay,
Councilwoman
Councilman Sacrum?
Council-
Jackson, you're muted. You're muted.
All right, can I just ask a follow-up and then I'll get off? So the Dutch Dialogues plan, even though you're going to merge it back in, does that include the land that we're swapping with the Humanities Foundation? Is that another way to think about that?
No, it doesn't. That's a great question also. That portion of the Dutch Dialogue's recommendation was essentially just a diagram, but a very illustrative and telling diagram about how we need to manage the low-lying areas in the district. The Humanities Foundation parcels are west of America Street. So this would be east of America Street.
So those properties, so Councilmember Jackson, would be a non-cash item because we're doing the swap.
Right, but we have to do stormwater there once we.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
We'll have the land already.
Okay, so that'll be in the general improvement line item.
Correct.
Right, thank you very much. I appreciate the thought.
Councilman Sacrum?
Thank you, Chair. Just two quick questions. Just to piggyback on Councilwoman Jackson's question about the prioritization, I'd like to understand, for example, the low line phase 2 and the phase 1A that have scored at 500 and 480 respectively. How is that different than the Cooper Street extension that scores 773? That's just my general question. And then just as a list of potential projects, are these the list of potential projects, meaning that there's nothing that's going to be added to this, but this is the exhaustive list that will be funded at that projected $60 million number?
I'll take your last question, and feel free to, any of my colleagues feel free, but to add to this, Mr. Saccharin, I can't walk down the street of this city without thinking and seeing of something that needs to be fixed. And so, this is certainly not an exhaustive list. I mean, this is just city staff getting together and saying, what are the big things that are in the ordinance, business left undone, things that we know about that the neighborhood may have asked for, a sidewalk, for example, that is incomplete. So yeah, there are certainly more projects that we could add to this list, but this is a pretty good one so far. On the first one, I'm happy to share how we actually ranked and prioritized these, but it is not overly scientific. These projects are widely ranging in the level of detail that we have about them. So the low line, for example, as Scott was saying earlier, they've done an extensive cost estimation and phasing, and I've been part of that project. And so they are pretty far along in terms of the readiness. But there are other projects on here that are really just concepts at the moment. Think about UG Street Phase 2. There's not a design plan for that. There's not a cost estimation for that. But you can really just walk down the street and see that UG Street from King to Meeting needs some help. And so because they're so different from one another in terms of their readiness and preliminary study, and they've gone out to different members of the cross-sector collaboration team, it was really just based on where they think they rank according to these criteria, and the criteria were weighted only slightly differently. I can look into how they were weighted and give you a more specific answer on that, but equity issues and plan adoption, I believe, ranked pretty high. So we can get into those details, but just to say that this is really staff's compilation of where these projects fall in priority.
Thank you.
Okay, and then with the East Side TIF, when the East Side TIF was started and generated, the East Side TIF could only be used for projects on the east side of the city. And when we started talking about the East Side TIF, we added the drainage in there because it was mostly trying to get more affordable housing, if you may, in that particular area. And with the flooding, what's happening on the east side with American Street, Columbus Street, Lime Street, and all the others in the area, then we kind of added stormwater into that part of the TIF also. So that's what taking on a lot of money. And then we extended the TIF down on Hughes Street, if you may, a little. So all that's a part of what they call the east side corridor, because the money can only be used for that particular area. It cannot be used outside that area, like on the west side, anywhere else. So you have so much projects that was on the east side anyway, when we first started with the TIF. and trying to get the TIF to try to get the money to be able to solve some of these problems that they have on the east side, if you may. That just a quick little background of some of the things that we started when we first came up with it.
Chairman?
Do we have any questions?
I
Councilman
do,
Gregory?
Mr. Chairman.
Huh?
My hand's up, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Councilman Gregory, that's when I'm coming to you.
Oh, okay. Alan, how do you define equity and how do you apply it in the scoring?
Well, to me, the definition of equity is very complicated, and I don't think I can really tackle that here at the moment. But
that's why.
But I can come back up to this as my guide. And so, in this prioritization, we define equity as doing these projects have a direct benefit to public safety, emergency access, lighting. Things like that. We referenced the vulnerability assessment, and we also looked at, does this do these respect and adhere to the original intent of the TIF ordinance? And then the other one is the relative annual median income of the area. And so I will say that this is a city staff collaboration. I would love that if some other people chimed in. I'm sorry, I can't speak more strongly to the equity component of this prioritization, but that's a great question, sir. Thank you.
I just add in council. Oh, I'm sorry.
I mean, I think when we start talking about equity, I think at a minimum, we need to include Amber Johnson in that discussion, who could clearly give you a definition of equity as it relates to the commission, and therefore perhaps do an overlay. And that's why I asked the question. And I know it's a very, very difficult answer, trust me, but Amber would be able to define that fairly quickly for us.
I can bet.
Okay, Miss Johnson.
Yes, sir. I was only going to add, when we thought about equity, we thought about fairness for the community in particular and making that community whole. One of the things that we've done over many years and looking at the East Side and collaborating with that community is heard the concerns of the residents that live there. And one of the things we wanted to make sure of when we were looking at these various activities and projects that needed to be implemented in this community, that one, Alan identified some, but it was literally meeting the need and ensuring that in meeting that need, we were providing equality for those residents who may have lacked sufficient housing, who may have lacked access to economic opportunity. And so those are some of the considerations we were making and discussed as we were prioritizing these projects and looking at the impact that it would have for the neighborhood and those residents that live there.
I think that's a great way to look at it. And I think as a city, as we move forward and we include equity as something that we're going to look at, I just wanted to make sure that we're consistent across the board. And that's why I'm saying I think there's a need for a discussion with Amber.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, I think, Mr. Chairman, I think Keith Benjamin was
okay, Mr. Benjamin.
So, Councilmember, in the citywide transportation plan, there's a statement of equity on page 8 that specifically speaks to some of these issues around placemaking and transportation. One of the biggest aspects that efforts that Alan had listed, including the benefits of the low line, is reuniting community is bifurcated by a highway. One of the aspects of being able to address a lot of the concerns and mitigation is what does make those particular aspects whole and what directly impacts those communities, especially when you look at their dependency, not just from an affordable housing perspective, but from a mobility perspective. And so that's where that AMI piece comes in. I think the other part is that we as a collaborative really went back into the language of the TIF and really looked at what is specifically stated about where they wanted to see impact and who would benefit out of that. And we wanted to make sure that that was at the top of the list for every single project that's considered and how city dollars are spent. And so I think, I'll take some of the brunt of the blame of pressing for this piece to be in here in terms of its measurement. These are conversations I've had with Amber many a times, but at least in part, in terms of statements that have been made, the outlining of equity's definition and otherwise, I think it has been outlined in a number of different ways, including in the citywide transport plan. But these were the areas we thought would raise a barometer of how we evaluate projects, but also give credence to what was outlined in the original document of the TIF district.
Okay. I mean, just as a quick response, and I think using the low line as an example is a good one. However, you and I both know that when we do projects like the low line in other parts of the country, okay, what happens is, particularly if it's affecting African-American communities, they tend not to benefit. And what happens is it's gentrified. While our intentions may be good, the result of the activity sometimes tilts the scale. And for me, that's why it's very, very important that we all use that term consistently across the board. And again, I think there needs to be a discussion when we're talking about equity or inclusion, that we have a discussion with Amber Johnson. Applicable across the board throughout the city.
And
Councilmember Appel? Oh, excuse me.
I believe Councilmember Waring also had a question. It looks like he may have dropped off, so I don't know if he called back in or not. If he's on the line.
Well, I'll go to Councilman. He's on the line. He's on the line now. If not, I'll go to Councilman Appel and then come back to him. Councilman Waring, are you there? Well, I'll go to Councilman Appel. I go to Councilman Appel and come back. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to ask a question here. So one of my questions about the matrix and the ranking system is, are we giving any consideration to how a specific redevelopment project will lead to further growth, further development, which will further kind of feed the TIF? In other words, something that has like a ROI with respect to tax base. So for example, the low line, like one of the big benefits with that project is the development that it'll help, stimulate. I mean, first question is, does that make sense, what I just said? Number two, are we factoring that into our matrix in any way?
I think it's consistent with some of the points I'm attempting to make, because it is going to foster development. What kind of development? Who will benefit from that development? We're talking equity. Who will benefit from that kind of development? And I think that those kinds of things need to be factored into the discussion. So I agree with you, Councilman Appel.
All right. Is Councilman Waring back on the line yet?
I got back on the line. I'm having trouble. I got a brand new computer, and I don't know whether it's got a short or something in it. So I apologize for going dark on you guys. The last time I was on the line here, we were being told how the priority list was put together. But Mr. Chairman, I had a couple of. Is this just for information, or are we supposed to be voting on something today?
Well, Councilmember, Mr. Chairman and Councilmember Waring, on the as we move to the next slide, I was going to come up with some recommendations from staff.
Well, maybe before we get to that next slide, let me, at first glance, when I looked at this information, a couple of things popped up to me. They got a priority weighting things here, but I'm going to tell you, let's just say from an individual standpoint, when I look at the overall city, I think affordable housing is one, and I think drainage is 1A. So you can have 1A being affordable housing, and 1A being drainage, but they're almost interchangeable. And the only reason I put affordable housing above that is because people need to live have a place to live. That said, when I look at the spending priority and the time frames, it's about 28% of this 60,000 would go to the low line in a 1 to 3 year period. And then when I look at affordable housing, as a matter of fact, look at land acquisition for affordable housing. In 5 to 8 years, $5 million. Well, we just got through talking about a little more than 1 acre site that's not too terribly far from this district for 12.5 or $12.6 million for 1 acre of land. And we're talking in 5 to 8 years when our area will still continue to appreciate. We're not going to get much for $5 million. And when I look at the drainage, until we make a decision on this, I think the Cooper-Jackson basins, we need to know some numbers on that before we commit dollars out of this. When we look at general stormwater improvements, we got 15 million, but again, that's over a 10-year period. The way I see this, I see the spending as being low line, and then somewhat affordable housing, and then drainage. And I think for those who are new to council, prior to being able to get that additional money from the STIB on September Clark, Spring Fishburne, we had to commit potentially 5 years of stormwater monies that would have been spent West Ashley, James Island, and Johns Island to complete September Clark, Spring Fishburne. So it was a glorious day when that 22.5 million came in, and this TIF was going to help with some of that. Now, fortunately, we've got more TIF money, but it showed you the priority that drainage had, to the point to where all resources was going to go to finish a $200 million project, and rightly so. It was that major of an artery running through town. But when you look at the Cooper and Jackson basins, I mean, you literally have people sloshing through water up to their shins, if not higher, approaching their knees. So how can we move forward on a spending list on this, and we don't even know what Cooper, the estimates were as much as $25 million. So, and that's before we even look at any, I really think we need to have a full handle on every drainage project that could possibly secure some funding out of this particular TIF before we, now if this is just for information, then I'm taking up everybody's time. But if we're going to have a vote on a priority, we need to have more time and more, I think, information, because I don't understand the scoring system here, because I don't really, I mean, to me, housing, drainage, and then obviously low line and that priority, not low line housing and drainage, because the housing is woefully underfunded. We were blessed to have had that swath of property from the Federal Highway Transportation Authority and State Department of Transportation that came back to the city. That, you know, we doing some great work putting affordable housing in there, but the land was free. So now going forward, we're going to have a pot of money to go out and acquire land, which is going to be a very arduous process. So we're kidding ourselves over 5 to 8 years from now that we're going to be able to get any serious locations with $5 million. So that's my take on that. If it's for information, I'm sorry I took too much time, but if it is for a vote today, I would not vote on this, not on this spending priority. We have not contextualized this from the standpoint of all drainage projects in that area. For example, the 6.9 that we spent on, I don't know if this would qualify, but we need to see the 6.9 that we committed to King Hugie. That's not the entire bill for that to be fixed entirely. That's not the 100% fixed on that. There are going to be additional costs even after that's done that I don't know that we have a handle on. So I would be intimidated on voting on something like this without so much information that we don't have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, you had something to say first?
Can I follow up to Councilman?
Okay, I'm going to ask, okay, Councilman Gregory, and then I'll go to the mayor because I know you had something he wanted to say.
Because I think we have to go back to Councilman Appel's question. And that question is, what kind of developments may occur as a result of these projects? And the second thing is, while I agree with housing, drainage, I'd like to also know how many jobs are going to be created. We're talking equity. How many jobs are going to be created for the residents in the area? And I'm not talking about temporary jobs. I'm talking about permanent jobs. To me, jobs have to be, and it may be, we need to go back to the factors, but I think it needs to also be a factor, especially when we're discussing equity. I mean, equity goes beyond housing, okay? It also goes toward being intentional with regard to developments that will assist those folks that are in need. And I think it's a very important factor in making decisions. Now, I understand that a lot of this is based upon who may be shovel ready. People who are ready to go right now, which of course I'm sure should be a factor. But again, I just think that we need to look at this a little more broadly than we've looked at.
Okay, Mr. Mayor?
Well, I appreciate all of those comments, and I think staff has tried to look at this very broadly, Councilmember Gregory, and this is a wide variety of needs. And so, yeah, this is just for your consideration today. And of course, we don't have $60 million to spend right now. This is something we're projecting over, you know, an extended period of time. We will have $12 million to spend this year from the 60, you might say. That's what Ms. Wharton has projected. It could be more than that once we get to April, when we get our numbers from the county and we see what the real assessments were for 2020, by the way. Some folks have estimated that rather than 12, we might be able to garner 15 or 16 million from this district this year. So this, I wouldn't say it's a moving target, but these are just considerations for your, you know, for what's to come out of this district. Now, there's also the Gateway District, and that's the district Councilmember Waring was referring to, that we had dedicated basically all of our future remaining years to the Spring Fishburne tunnel. So we do think we'll get some extra income out of that TIF district as well, once now that we've secured that $22 million grant from the state. So this is all good news. This is all good news in my opinion. So, and I don't question at all the priorities Councilmember Waring just mentioned of housing, flooding, and overall improvements. I would suggest to you that based on Councilmember Appel's observation of what is the improvement that could be made of all of these that would incent other development, which would then grow the value of the district and the income of the district. And honestly, I would say that it's doing the low line, because it would just, I think, motivate investment in the district. And back to the low line, I know we've heard all kind of pitches about it from our fine friends, the friends of the low line, but in fact, many of the projects that they have proposed to us include things like drainage improvements and mobility enhancements, and I mean, it in of itself covers a lot of bases, so to speak, that provide for this part of the city. So, so just thinking this year about the $12 million, and this is just a suggestion at this point, but Alan, if you'd share the next screen, what we did was we took the kind of higher priority items that also were more shovel ready that we think we can move forward. And I'll share again, maybe Councilmember Waring, I don't know if you were on the line.
I am.
But before, when we were talking about what's left in the initial 12 million, I mean, we got 3 million sitting there for drainage that, you know, we hadn't spent, that it'll probably be next year before we even spend that money because we haven't designed and developed the projects yet. So you do get in a matter of timing. And so this is just suggestion, these 8 kind of broad categories. And I think Alan put a few of them together. The first one is mostly roadways, sidewalk, mobility improvements at $3.5 million. We just got, you know, the other night, the approval from DOT to get that little property that would connect Cooper Street back to Meeting Street. We think that's a great idea to go ahead and try to get that done. I did include a recommendation that we fund some additional money for the smokestacks based upon our report the other day from that committee to get us from the 700,000 or so project budget that we now have up to $1.5 million. And I would propose that we take 400 from the new issuance, and we've got 550 in the old issuance. So we could do that short term and get that inner liner removed. Another $1 million for stormwater that is really just going in the piggy bank. A portion of the low line phase 1A to come from the next issuance of $4 million of the 7.5 that they're requesting. Another $1.4 million right now for affordable housing acquisition, improvements to Martin Park and others, and then additional sidewalk repairs. And there's some parking issues apparently that Councilmember Mitchell knows about. So these were the staff recommendations for us to consider. You know, we wouldn't be doing this, by the way, until probably May or June at the earliest. So we got plenty of time to think about it. But I do want to give our friends at the Lowline some assurance that we're going to make a commitment to move forward in partnership with them. It is shovel ready. They are willing to, as Mr. Parker described, basically step up to the plate and manage this. We will bring, we're working on an agreement with them that would specify terms of them. And you know, it's one of those things, you think about the economic recovery coming out of COVID-19. If there's something that we can go ahead and get the shovel in the ground in the next year to 18 months, I think it's very positive. So this is just for your consideration. There'll be no vote taken on it today or at the council. Frankly, wouldn't approve specific spending, as you know, until we bring any kind of contract to council, to Ways and Means. But this is a beginning of a conversation about, I think, the good news of us having some resources to be able to spend in this district and to support our friends at the Lowline and get this, what everyone I think agrees will be a transformational project to be able to get off the ground later this year.
Mr. Chairman, I know I'm at a disadvantage, you can't see me. I agree with a lot of that, Mr. Mayor. But let me ask this. What land acquisition for affordable housing, what parcels of land do we have in the queue now that we're trying to acquire for affordable housing?
I'm going to defer to Ms. Johnson on that.
Councilmember Waring, we've looked at a few, and quite honestly, there are just a few that remain. Some of the sites that we have seen are quite costly now. So Basically, we're trying to balance literally the cost to what can be produced and then who, considering and thinking about our end user, our end client. So naturally, when we look at some of the costs, 900,000 here, $1.1 million here, we're thinking more on the rental end. At this point, we've looked at 3 or 4 parcels that remain on the peninsula close to this area. And the costs are phenomenal. So we are looking at those, having those discussions to see, in fact, if we can make this work. It will likely require more than what we see here or what's been allocated here. We haven't naturally gone towards any contracts, but we have been speaking with realtors, looking at land, going out just to determine what's available so that we have the opportunity to secure these properties, hopefully sooner versus later.
Thank you. That's why it's 5 to 8 years is frankly is unrealistic at the numbers that present themselves today. So the priority should be accelerating that schedule. I just wanted to point that out for observation. Thank you.
That's a great point. Great point.
Chairman?
Councilman Gregory, then we'll.
Yeah, I agree with everything that the mayor just said with regard to the low line in particular. The one part, though, that I think that we need to also focus on with regard to the low line is business development. Along that low line, part of the low line, there will be businesses created. And again, I go back to equity, okay, with regard to that. And lastly, Mr. Mayor, you know that there have been discussions in our economic empowerment subcommittee of the commission to develop the James Lewis Business Development Center in the building that's going to be named in his honor. And I would like for us somehow, I mean, if we've got $500,000 left, we consider, okay, what we may need in order to pay for that proposed center. It's not come before council or anything, so all this is new to council members and all that. But again, as a part of the Economic Empowerment Committee, there is a recommendation coming out to develop a business development center.
And we are planning on doing that. Did you raise your hand, Ms. Johnson?
Ms. Johnson, you raise your hand?
Yes, sir, Mayor and Council Member Mitchell. I wanted to mention, in light of the conversation that Councilmember Gregory is bringing forth, we have began to look at specifically in relation to the low line, a strategy to mitigate both displacement and gentrification. Looking at similar projects across the country, we realize that can be a result of this type of project if it's not handled properly before it starts. Okay. And so we met last year with internal staff, some other friends of the low line, other members of the community, some of which I think have served on the racial equity task force from the various task force to begin to put together a strategy. So we're refining that now. Hopefully in the next month or two, we'll be able to present a draft of that to the CD committee. But we're looking at that, trying to make sure that we're making all of the appropriate considerations going in so that we're not chasing our tails later, that literally are making sure that we are advancing this in the appropriate way such that we don't cause the level of gentrification and displacement that we've seen in other parts of the country. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Chairman, I think Councilwoman Jackson has her hand up.
Councilwoman Jackson, then I think we're gonna move on, I think.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I really do just want to give my thoughts about the low line as sort of the poster child of what we are talking about here. I do feel like there are investors waiting to come into a place like Charleston that should have the opportunity to attract equity development. I mean, it is a very, real and growing thing. And yes, maybe it's trendy and maybe it's, not as sincere as we would like it to be among all parties. But if we define it and we make this the hallmark of the low line on all aspects of livability and mobility and, you know, business development. I mean, I think we have a real thing here that could achieve a lot of our goals in one place and then become a model for what we can do to attract other outside equity investors, meaning money equity. I was introduced to a nonprofit organization that's been in place since 1993. It's called Green Lining. It's the counter action to redlining. And they have some amazing resources and tools. And the one that I was introduced to yesterday, just the title of it is called Making Equity Real in Mobility Pilot Projects. And it has a whole, their 4 steps to accomplishing that are equity considerations. Know what your goals are for achieving racial equity and economic equity, community engagement best practices, and then clearly define a pilot project that can take on all of the goals and the resources that you pour into it in a very prescribed way. So I think there's great examples of how we can do this, and I'm glad to see it on the list of your $12 million, Mayor.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, you're on mute.
Any other questions? So we can proceed. What's the willing pleasure of the committee on item number 1?
We accepted his information. We're talking about what we're discussing.
Yeah, I thought it was just for information.
Yeah.
Well,
As I mentioned, I wanted to present this to you to have a little time to deliberate and think about it. And in the meantime, as I mentioned, we are working on we've really just started work on an agreement with the low line about how they would manage the project. And I think it would be appropriate when that agreement comes to council that we have a specific amount in there, and we can make that decision at that time firmly. But I did want you to know, you know, what our recommendation is at this point, is to help them get jump started. And again, this wouldn't be the only source that they might draw from. In fact, you heard Mr. Parker say they've already put $4 million themselves in it so far. At this, in a way, we're just matching what they've done to date, and so we're catching up with them. But anyway, I think more to come when we bring back a definitive agreement to council.
okay, so this will be coming back to the community development or going to council?
I think we'd come back to community development again before we'd take it to council.
Yes.
Now, I do want to say this, though, about the 550,000 that's still just sitting in the bank unallocated from the first round. I would like to hear from Mr. Parker. He doesn't have to tell me right now. You know, until we get down the road and he wants to get going on the engineering. Of course, this will come with the agreement too. But we should be able to allocate some really more immediate funding in order to get the design and engineering of the project really underway. Scott, what do you think a budget would be like for that?
Well, Mayor, I appreciate that immensely. We would like to get going on the design. As I mentioned earlier, we'd like to start construction this year. And in order to do that, we need to get the design done. You know, the 550 would go a long way towards making that happen for sure. And, you know, the design would be based on what our understanding of our phase 1 project is. But, you know, the 550 would go a real long way to help make that happen. And, you know, if you all could see a way to make that available to us we would put that to real good work right away and be able to, when the money is allocated, to be able to put it directly in the ground. Which is really what we want to do. We've got some real good momentum going, and we'd love to be able to take advantage of that. And all of the things that you all have been talking about tonight are things that we're totally affordable housing, drainage, stormwater management. I mean, that's the cornerstone of the low line.
Right. Absolutely.
And so, yeah.
We'll refine that a little bit and get back to us, Scott. And but I did of that 550. We're going to need some of it to finish phase 1 of the smokestack. So just keep that in mind.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you everyone for your consideration, and let's continue to deliberate on this.
Thank you. So we'll move on down to item number 2.
Mayor, let's just not forget the Business Development Center, okay?
We won't. No, I'm going to bring you a deal you can't refuse.
I know what it is.
I don't want no more. Now, item number 2, a 3-year analysis on the use of the mixed use workforce housing. That's Ms. Johnson.
Yes, sir. So members of CD Committee of City Council, both new and old, back in 2017, it was enacted in 2018. We took upon ourselves an analysis, and when I say we, planning staff, zoning staff, Department of Housing and Community Development staff, an analysis of the mixed-use workforce housing ordinance. Initially, when this ordinance was proposed, and as it is now, it was an opt-in zoning, meaning that developers had to request this particular zoning in order to secure it. At that time, we required that if they chose the mixed-use workforce housing zoning, they provided 15% of workforce housing on site, 15% of the build out, i.e. if they're building 100, 15% of that had to be affordable. And the affordability period that was attached initially was 10 years. When we looked at that, we decided that we needed to make changes and amendments to that particular zoning. And you all, some of you who were on council would likely recall, there was quite a bit of pushback when we went to amend this particular zoning. Council settled on the amendment of changing the percentage of workforce housing to 20% versus the 15, with an affordability period of 25 years. We also added a few options, and that option was providing cash in lieu if you didn't want to build, if the developers couldn't or didn't want to build on site, and a land in lieu. The land in lieu being that property had to be a developable piece of property within 2 miles of the site of the property that was being considered for the zoning. And so what we committed to, and I remember in particular, Council Member White asking us to bring back an analysis of this to say, because at that time, the development community pushed back pretty hard on the amount that we wanted to charge for a fee. At the time when we visited this proposal, we were looking at $3.40 times the gross square foot of the building as a fee. If they weren't entitled before 2018, they could stay at the $3.40. If they were entitled after that time frame, they had to pay $5.10 times the gross square foot of the building. The proceeds from this fee in lieu were going to an affordable housing fund. Now, Council Member Mitchell smiled because he remembers the multiple meetings we had. We brought in experts from outside. We looked at California. We looked at Colorado. We looked at best practice strategies from across our nation to, one, come up with a fee that we could use that we felt like was fair, i.e. meaning it would help us to build additional affordable housing and was not too punitive. Now, what we've determined is that literally every developer that has opted into this zoning of 14 projects or developments that have occurred in this in this area. And let me step back for a minute. This MU2 zoning is only allowed in the urban core. We have been talking over, well, pre-COVID, we started talking about maybe extending this zoning to other areas of the city of Charleston, but we've not gotten very far yet because COVID happened and it kind of threw some things in, it threw a wrench in the plans. But anyway, so right now it's only offered in the urban core. And of the 14 developments that have started, that have gone vertical in many cases, 13 have chosen the fee in lieu. So overwhelmingly, they've chosen the fee in lieu, which tells me, this is totally my opinion, that that fee wasn't as bad as they said it was when they were slapping us on the wrist, that kind of thing. To date, we have collected about 11.1 million or 11.13 million in fee in lieu funds, and we have about 2 million that is coming into us here early this year, at least in the first quarter. We have expended, and I believe we included this in your attachment, about $7.1 million of what has come in to date. So we have close to 4 million maybe in the fund right now. And I'll tell you about what housing we will use that on. The 7.1 million is projecting about 237 units, producing 237 units from that $7.1 million investment. Okay. What we have determined is, and if I could just kind of sum it up, is that the fee in lieu amount was too low. No surprise there. I think all of us knew that, but this was our first trial run, if you will, with this particular type of development and particular type of fee. But we, and the mayor and I sat in his office many evenings trying to figure out the best fee to apply to this. We have since learned that maybe we should have gone a little bit higher. Nonetheless, having an unrestricted amount of funding beyond federal dollars to contribute and invest in affordable housing is awesome, is substantial. Many communities do not have that. So this is not all negative things relative to the fee in lieu because it has served us well. One of the things that we determine is that we as the city of Charleston, we can achieve longer affordability periods with the fee option, as we know. That was one of the things we looked at. Usually with workforce housing, you're looking at the 80% crowd. With that fee money, it allowed us to stretch that money and not only serve 80%ers, but 60%ers and 50%ers. So that was the value, if you will, one of the values of having the fee in lieu. The other aspect of that is with the fee in lieu dollars, especially when invested in a for sale development, we received a level of return on investment, which I think Councilmember Appel was alluding to earlier in our earlier conversation. What kind of return are we getting on our investment? So this report literally looks at unit return and it looks at dollar return. And I will also mention leverage to you here in a moment. And I'm going quickly because I know Councilmember Mitchell's looking at me like, hurry up, Gianna, we want to get through this. But it's really important for you to understand both the pros and the cons of this. And if I could just sum it up for us, fee is too low. Ultimately, in my conversations with the mayor, I have said, Mayor, we need to look at increasing this fee. One of the things that we did not do when we were going through this process back in late 2017 and when council approved it in 2018 is put an inflation factor in this fee. Thus, as inflation has increased over the last 2 years or so, well, now 3, we haven't included an inflation factor in this calculation. So part of us trying to recapture, if you will, some of the dollars that we left on the table, if nothing else, we need to consider going forward and have included in this an inflation factor if we want to leave this as an opportunity to develop additional funding for affordable housing. So for instance, if we had had this fee at a 7.65 percentage or amount that we would apply to the gross square footage, we would have had double what we have collected to date, i.e. I mentioned 11 million. we would have had close to $23 million that would have been collected in this fee in lieu fund if that small increase had been happening for us over the last several years. So that is one consideration I want you all to think about. Of the projects that we invested in for this development in particular, the Maryville property, we invested fee in lieu of $771,000. We got back about $654,000. We did what we call a Katrina Cottage project, where we invested $666,000 of fee in lieu funds. We got $462,000 of that back. We also invested in the Fenwick property. We used fee in lieu money to purchase the Fenwick property. That was $3 million. We haven't figured out our total return yet, but naturally there will be infrastructure costs, construction costs. So we should see a solid return on investment from that as well. We also invested funding of, we invested funding in the acquisition of the low-lying parcel. That was $520,000 in the acquisition of that site, and I'll mention more about that later. We should see a nice return on that because the estimated cost to build that site is in excess of $13 million. Vertical construction, not talking all infrastructure. We also invested money of around $1.8 million in Grace Homes. And as most of us know, Grace Homes vertical construction was $18 million. Other stormwater infrastructure was around $1.8 million. So that gives you a sense, if you will, of the small investment of fee in lieu money and what was returned, or the leverage that we're seeing, as well as the return on that investment we made. Can we do better is the question we pose to ourselves. Absolutely. So what we are going to bring back to you all, such that it can hopefully get to City Council before the first quarter is over of this year, is that we look at increasing this fee in lieu fund. And I always tell the mayor that fee in lieu for me has been a double-edged sword, because we lost the opportunity for the units themselves, although we gained that unrestricted dollar. Somewhere we have to meet in the middle and do a little bit better with those numbers.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman?
Mayor, hands up first, and then we'll go to Councilman Waring and then Councilman Gregory.
And the mayor.
So just picking up on that last point that Gianna made, we do now, and of course this was a new program for us, and as she said, the benefits have far outweigh any shortfalls, but we can make it better. And one of the things we realize is we're not getting any of those units built by these developers. They're just paying the whole fee. And so the thought just occurred to me earlier today when I was talking to her, and throw it out for y'all's consideration, and we can include it if you think it's a good idea when we come back with the fee increase, is maybe have a step fee, so that say the number of units you're doing 100 units. So normally under the program, MU zoning, 20 of them would have to be affordable, right? Right now, you can write us a check for the whole 20 and do none. So what if we graduated it so that, say if you did 10 units and then wanted to buy the 10 out, at least you provided half of what you otherwise would have done. You'd buy out at the regular price, so to speak. But if you want to buy all 20 units out, that second 10, the price goes up dramatically. So it would provide somewhat of an incentive for the developer to at least provide half of the units that he would have under normal MU conditions, if that makes sense. I can probably figure out a way to explain what I'm thinking better, but and the point is to have some graduation to where the more units you pay for, the more expensive it gets. So that it'd be some incentive again for them to provide some of the units.
Councilman Waring?
I mean, I agree with all that, Mr. Mayor. If you remember several years ago, we were seated in chambers and you had your calculator out trying to figure out this cost per square foot for fee and lieu. Ms. Shaw Johnson, that was a great recommendation. I mean, that you put out. Do you have a specific dollar amount that we should go to, or will it catch up with inflation? I mean, should it be based on, I don't know, consumer price index or whatever? But it would be great if we could put a motion on the floor and pass that today, as opposed to waiting for another couple of weeks. Piece with Mr. Mayor that was talking about the graduated aspect. If we can't work that out today, then maybe that comes in at the next community development meeting. But I agree with you. Some inflationary aspects should be put there. I do agree that given the level of development we have going on, it's too low. And one last thing I'd like to ask. So if you have a recommendation, I'd certainly like to put that in the form of a motion so we could vote on it. But a lot of these apartment complexes, for example, that's being built West Ashley. Saw one in the paper today that's proposed coming through, TRC. Unless they get the MU designation, we can't. If somebody's going to build apartments, period, can we amend our zoning ordinance to include an affordable aspect and fee and lieu?
I don't know.
I don't think.
Yeah, no, that would be inclusionary zoning.
Right.
And, the state, I'm told, we can't make that happen. So the other way to approach that, I mean, you get into maybe a taking situation in a sense, Mr. Appel, is to downzone the number of units that are allowed on a parcel, and then force people who want to do those dense apartment complexes, force them to ask us for the MU.
That's a great idea, Mr. Mayor. That's a wonderful idea. Because I'm telling you, there's so many other areas. I mean, West Ashley, James Island, Johns Island, that affordability clause would be, if we can somehow get that working, that fee and lieu would have generated so much more money if the Standard and all those apartments now in Johns Island that's been built and continue to be built West Ashley. We ought to put a high priority on that. That's a great idea, Mr. Mayor. Downzone the units, and they get an upzone
with the
event they want to go a higher number, then the fee and lieu kicks in. But that's, we got to put a priority on that. All those are great ideas. So hopefully we walk away with some action steps. So we just didn't have a good conversation today, and next year from now we wish we had done something.
Well, Gianna wanted to give everybody the report. We don't have a specific number, and I just came up with one of those ideas earlier today. So let us come back to you the next meeting. Maybe I could ask if Community Development Committee doesn't mind, if we come up with a recommendation that we could just go straight to council and not have to wait the month to come back to y'all. Is that okay?
I would be okay with that.
That'd be fine.
It's fine.
And
What
Mr.
am I
and
about that?
Councilmember
I
Gregory.
think we have Councilman Gregory and then Councilman Jackson.
A couple of questions for John Song. Have you gotten any money from hotels?
Not yet. I have that on my list to check with Mandy and Chris on that right now.
Okay, and the reason why I raised that question, okay, is I thought that task force that you created, Mayor, was just fantastic.
Yep.
For us to be able to negotiate. Some call it an impact fee. It doesn't matter as long as we get the money. But where I'm going with it is, why can't we put a housing linkage to all development in the city, just as we did with hotels? Everybody's quiet. I I mean, if you want to get money for affordable housing, link it to every single development in the city. We won't have a problem at all having money for affordable housing. I don't know if legally we can do it. They said we couldn't do it with hotels, Mayor, but we did, didn't we? And so all I'm saying is that maybe we need to get legal or somebody involved to determine whether or not we can have an affordable housing linkage to all development in the city of Charleston. So then it's not restricted. We'll have money for West Ashley. We'll have money for James Island. I mean, we'll have money across the board if we were able to do that as a city. And I think there are some cities that are doing that.
By the way, this probably won't surprise you. I just saw some preliminary results from our study for the comprehensive plan. The biggest need for units of housing in the city of Charleston is West Ashley.
Yes. Yes. And so can we get legal or somebody to look into that, Mayor? And if we need to form a task force, just like we did for hotels?
I don't think we need a task force for that. I hear you. We'll ask about that.
Would you please? Okay.
We'll ask our attorney and staff to get involved in that and seek that out and bring it back. And then we'll have all this information back to the next meeting.
Okay, I've been throwing this out there for the last 8 years now. This isn't new.
The 8 years, this is time.
And the only thing we were able to catch was the hotels. Let's try to catch some more.
All right.
Okay.
I think Councilwoman Jackson, I think you had your hands up.
Yes, thank you. I'll be really quick. I salute Gianna especially. This is a very good, well documented report. I really appreciate you wanting us to understand the balancing act. And, you know, I just, it was giving me deja vu. This topic was the reason that I got involved in city local government affairs. If you recall, I bugged the heck out of city council about this fee in lieu and the terms that you all were considering that were way too easy on the development community. As a private citizen, I was coming to citizens participation and giving you examples from, you know, my experience in Northern Virginia and other metropolitan areas. So I do feel like we need to just keep going with this because the trains are still moving out of the station. So we've got a lot of opportunity. And I think any envelopes that we can push, you know, if they're shades of gray, let's try it. I really think that we all know that housing affordability is a main priority, and we can't get there because we got to spend money on the stupid stormwater improvements. So, you know, that has to be the priority because it's our lifeline. But housing is the desirable priority. I think we should just, you know, start to talk about it like that. So go for it.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Okay, you have any other question? And not be a
Saccharin had his hand up.
And Appel.
Oh, okay.
Hey, Ross, go ahead, Ross. Mine's quick, so go ahead.
Okay, cool. I'm going to try to make mine quick as well. I agree with everything. Yeah, I think there's been a lot of great ideas put out on the table today from Gianna, from the mayor, from Councilman Gregory, from everybody. And I would just want to point out that in addition to all these inclusionary zoning techniques, fee in lieu, things of that nature, there's also the 800-pound gorilla in the room when you want to talk about really, really moving the needle on affordable housing is looking at our zoning ordinance from the very core, right? I mean, really looking at single family zoning, where it can exist, where it should be removed. Because when we truly set the table in the regulatory framework to allow density everywhere in appropriate ways, that'll truly unlock the potential of the economy citywide to get more housing units developed. And these subsidies and government programs are important, absolutely have a role. We need to keep doing it. But if we can tweak some of those dials at the core of our zoning ordinance, that is really going to, we're going to stop talking about, a dozen, 100 units here. We're going to be talking about thousands of units getting onto the market. We've got to find ways to make affordable housing profitable without the government subsidies. If we can do that, developers will make this housing happen. It's what they did for many, 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 many years before a lot of these zoning kind of straitjackets were imposed earlier in the 20th century. So very exciting stuff. I love when y'all talk about some really cool and innovative zoning techniques, and really want to make sure we keep this conversation going. Thanks.
And that's why you're on the commission, Ross.
Mr. Chairman, I hate to invade like this, but
Councilman Waring, I think we had Sacram, and then I'll come to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chairman. I think just to add to Ross's, that was kind of my question. I understand the fee in lieu is a disincentive for for developers to actually build the units. I get that part. So the current rate is $510, Gianna. Is that what it is per square foot?
Yes.
Okay, and then the other side, I guess this is more to Ross's point. If we change that fee in lieu so it hurts them a bit more, or disincentivizes them to do it, is there anything on the building side that we are creating that's not incentivizing them to actually build those units? So maybe this speaks to Ross's point about some of our zoning changes. I just don't want to go through and increase the fee in lieu rate and not really think about the other side of the ledger of what could happen, because we might get to the point where they'll continue to pay the fee in lieu, and we might increase our pot of funding for affordable housing, but we still won't get those units built. So I'm just trying to understand both sides of the ledger.
Ms. Johnson?
You're on mute, Gianna.
I know. For some reason, I was not unmuting. So on the other side, Councilmember Saccharin, this doesn't answer your question directly, but we are creating, and Mandy just came on, so hopefully she can add to this. We are trying to make it easier to build in the city of Charleston regardless, which we know time is money. So we're instituting some processes to expedite the construction of affordable housing. We've looked at trying to develop a position as a concierge so that it will facilitate faster development, which ultimately saves money. And to the mayor's earlier point, if we can secure some level of units on site and some funding, naturally that is the best of both worlds. So you still get the units, because in addition to the need for affordable housing, there's the need for housing in general. So I think if we get the affordable, we get the housing that's needed in general, and a level of fee, we get the kind of balance that we're really after. And I don't know if that answered your question, but Mandy, I'll defer to you.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, add to what Ms. Johnson just said. When we do the fee in lieu of, we're thinking about permanent affordability. Without the fee in lieu of, we're just kicking the can down the road. Okay.
Yeah, you're
in
right.
25 years, those units will be market, and we're in the same place. So I think that I think that we've got to think of it in that vein, in terms of when we come up with different recommendations in terms of how can we keep the affordability. Okay, if we use the mayor's approach of 10 and 10, okay, how can we make sure that the 10 that are affordable can be affordable forever? That's very important. Otherwise, we're just kicking the can down the road.
That's true. That's one of our problems. I think Councilman Waring, I think he was next.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to Councilmember Appel, that's a couple of times that Councilmember Appel has referred to, maybe not at these meetings, but other meetings, about a deep dive into our zoning ordinance. We talk about a task force. Can we put together something real small? I mean, obviously, even being chaired by, it's great for me to volunteer his time, but being chaired by Councilmember Appel on that, because I do believe there's a wealth in our zoning code that just needs to be it's just obsolete, man. We need a lot of things we need to clean out of there. But again, great ideas, but got to get the action step on it. You know, we did the piece on the reduced lot size, which works out great, you know, for affordable housing. It's paid benefits already in a limited way on a few projects that the city's doing. But I think there's more in that zoning code that can provide benefits like that as well. So, and although we need to take that up and kind of move forward with that.
Just to sort of respond, that's something that the housing component of the commission is in fact doing. And that's why we're very happy that Ross is now on the commission, and he has already trying to bring in people to assist with respect to our housing subcommittee in coming up with the kinds of recommendations that he's talking about. I just hate to do another mechanism when the commission has already started that process, and now that Ross is a commissioner and has already reached out to the chairman of the housing task force and communicated some of what he just communicated to us. I think that that's going to grow out of the commission's recommendations, and I'm not talking about 2 or 3 years from now either. I mean,
I hear you, Mr. Co-Chairman. So, Chairman Gregory and Chairman Saccharin, get it done from Councilmember Ross.
We got it.
Councilmember Mitchell, I think Mandy had a comment that she wanted to make as well.
You did? Okay, so that was one.
Sorry, just quickly, we all can recognize that our zoning ordinance needs some tweaking and some amending on various levels. I'm also excited about this conversation because I think the work of our planning division, Christopher Morgan, his staff, and the comprehensive plan update that they're working on and the data that's been collected from our consultants, our housing consultants, I think that will give us the data and the support that we need to move forward with some of these housing changes and zoning ordinance changes. So I'm encouraged by this conversation. I will say that it's going to be a heavy lift, but we can do it. But it might be something that you see in future budget requests to help us with some of those ordinance amendments. So we look forward to that. And also, Councilmember Waring, to your point, in lots of these new housing developments and housing in West Ashley in the past, we have had conversations with developers saying, you know, what can we do to help you provide more affordable housing in your development on your property? And it has all come down to their cost of construction. So even saying, you know, we could help you with a PUD, or are there ways that we can modify our zoning ordinances to help you? And it comes down to their cost of construction. You know, we already have reduced parking requirements, and we were trying to be more flexible with how they use the land, and it comes down to those financial components. So zoning and planning, we hear you, and we want to help resolve some of these problems and provide more affordable housing across the board too. So we look forward to your support with our comp plan update. This is encouraging.
Thank you.
Chairman, can I follow up with a question to Ms. Herring?
Tomorrow?
I said, can I follow up with a question to Mandy?
Yes, you can. Let me.
All right. In this comprehensive update, is this going to show some sort of reform to what's required for a variance? For example, once this comprehensive plan is updated, if somebody needs a 15-inch, 16-inch variance to build a house, do they still have to go in front of the BZA? Is that going to be a staff level decision to accelerate the process, or what?
Well, the comprehensive plan, sure, the comprehensive plan, you know, it's going to be much more high level than that. And from the high level comprehensive plan, we will have to make tailored zoning ordinance amendments. So I say that's something that can be discussed at that time. The comp plan is not perhaps going to address that specifically, but the broader recommendations should be able to trickle down to make other zoning ordinance revisions. And Christopher, hop in if I haven't addressed that appropriately.
So, and that's fine. The second part, and this is it for me, but when the people of West Ashley say it comes down to their cost of construction, the people on the peninsula have the same issue with cost of construction. I did say it's higher on the peninsula to construct versus out in the suburban areas, and they can somehow factor in, the fee in lieu and make it work. I don't see why they can't make it work, in the suburban areas.
That's it?
Hello?
Councilmember Mitchell, we have two more items and they will go
Yes.
really quickly.
Okay.
Matt Ojala.
Well, we can move on to number 3. Update on the housing for Fair Charleston plan.
Yes.
Yes, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. So thank you, Chair Mitchell, Mayor and council members. So I'm just going to provide a hopefully very brief update on the city's Housing for Fair Charleston plan. As you'll recall, the plan was released in early 2020, so just under a year ago, and it was produced in partnership with the Bloomberg Harvard Fellowship Program. So we brought in some outside expertise to work with staff throughout the city and to also consult with external stakeholders to ultimately develop a plan that accomplished 2 main objectives. One, to provide an analysis of the current state of housing affordability in Charleston. And 2, to create a cool toolkit of potential solutions that the city could use to address the challenges that we face. Now, let's skip through here. So within the toolkit that was created in this plan, there were 35 separate tools that were grouped into categories of zoning and policy tools, funding tools, education and empathy building tools, and capacity building tools. And I won't go through all of these items, but hopefully just by glancing at them, you can get a sense of what was covered and considered within the plan. And as an example, one of the tools considered on zoning incentives, each of these looks at what the tool is, what the city is currently doing on it, recommendations to strengthen the tool, and importantly, looking at what other cities around the country are doing. What are their good ideas? What are the lessons we can learn from them? And how do we learn from that and implement that here in Charleston? And so with this plan, there are these 35 tools, 103 individual recommendations, but no implementation roadmap for how the city would move this forward. So staff worked across departments to evaluate each of the recommendations and tools found within the plan using the prioritization matrix found on the right, and use that as a way for us to figure out which items we should be working on in the near term, what items should be pushed off to later, and are there items that maybe don't make sense for the city in the near term. And I'm happy to report that there's been a lot of good progress on the plan. So far, 21 of the 35 tools have already been started to be in process or have been completed. And what I wanted to do is just pull out some of the examples from the plan. And these are recommendations that scored highly amongst staff's evaluation. And you can see I grouped them in 3 different categories: those that have been completed, those that are in process, and those that scored highly but have not yet been started. So you can see here, the fee in lieu report that you just were presented. That was a recommendation under the plan, approving an ADU ordinance that you all passed last year that has strong affordability requirements. That's been completed from the plan. The city's created an inventory of all the vacant or abandoned parcels in the city to determine if a city land bank is needed. Council approved an ordinance last year on more flexible building setbacks that fall under zoning incentives. And the city has created a document of all the different HUD programs available and to see if there are any additional programs or funding streams that apply within the Charleston context. There are other items that are in process. As was mentioned earlier, the affordable housing concierge. Currently, there's a part-time concierge, but the plan calls for a full-time position to help ensure that our affordable housing developments are moving quickly through the process. And again, on ADUs, looking at potential incentives to support that program. City Land Bank conducting research to really determine what a land bank may look like here at the city of Charleston and how that could be incorporated into existing entities, such as the Charleston Redevelopment Corporation, and more on zoning incentives. I think following up on the discussion you all just had, looking at how we can expand zoning incentives to more districts in the city. And then lastly, I'll just comment on inclusionary zoning that was also mentioned earlier today. That's an effort the city's been undertaking for some years now to enact state enabling legislation that would allow cities the option to enact mandatory inclusionary zoning. So I know just in the interest of time, I'll cut it off there and just say that going into the future, that the city and staff are going to continue to work with this document as a tool to help address the challenges that we face on affordability, and also recognize that this isn't the holy grail of all solutions to affordability. And while we'll continue to work to implement the items within the plan, there's a lot of work that's being done to come up with new ideas to really ensure that we're doing everything we can to address the big challenges that we face here in the city. So thank you very much for your time.
Anyone have any questions? If not, we'll move on down to number 4, update.
Mr. Chairman, I just want you to know I pull up my IT hat and I fix my computer.
I saw when you came on. I said, nah, he's coming on to the end.
I traced all the calls. It wasn't plugged in good.
Okay, we'll move on to item number 4, update on low-lying affordable housing site.
Council Member Mitchell and members of the city committee wanted you to be aware, we released a request for proposals last year. We received 3 very good proposals. Selection committee was established. Council members Saccharin and Mitchell. 2 city council members, Councilmember Saccharin and Mitchell is late, sat on the evaluation committee. NHE was chosen as the entity with an intent to award. They have been quite successful in pursuing low-income housing tax credit developments in the state of South Carolina. I think they've received 9 out of the last 10 rounds of state housing. Their proposal included 55 total units of affordable housing on the low-lying site that the city has purchased. They requested probably less gap financing than the other developers that proposed. And again, we had some very strong proposals. The committee overwhelmingly chose this one. The goal is to have an option to lease and a ground lease before you at the first meeting in February. We are following the directive that you all gave a few years ago when you indicated the city should retain the properties that it owns. And so versus transferring full rights of that property to this development team, they will enter into a ground lease, an option to lease first, so that they can go through the process of preparing themselves for the vertical construction. And then a ground lease is the exhibit to that option to lease that would then be executed later on. So wanted you to be aware that that process is moving forward. And again, we were real pleased with the proposals that we got as a result of that RFP release. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions? Ms. Johnson with that?
Mr. Chairman, the mayor has his hand up.
Oh, okay. Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Chairman, I don't think I need to say this, but just based on these reports you're getting from Matt and Gianna, they're doing a great job.
Yes.
And I just want to publicly say that. Y'all keep it up. Y'all are doing terrific. And
thank you, Mayor.
Just up to us to give them the resources to make this happen. Thank you.
That's what it is. And most of the things that we didn't vote on will be coming back again to us at another meeting. So once they get all the information together, then we will contact the committee and have a meeting as soon as we possibly can. So anything else to bring before the Community Development Committee?
Mr. Chairman, I do have a question. I do have an observation. Mr. Mayor, I agree with you totally on that, but I think you need some credit as well too. I mean, having 50 million total out there in the state of the city address, I mean, that's a heck of a challenge, and we know we can do it. We can do it. You know, we can do it. So hopefully other cities will give you a call to say, hey, how you doing that? I hope so. I mean, let's get it duplicated around the region. So prayers and salutations going around. Now, last year, or maybe a year before, Mr. Mayor, I believe Senator, Kempson. Remember, we had an initiative to add 3% to our building license fee. Somehow that's got to be approved through the state. I still don't understand why. Can we look into that again? I mean, come back with some information on that at the next meeting, in particular in light of home rule, because I don't understand why we have to go to the state of South Carolina to get an approval on a business license fee in the city of Charleston. I mean, we could, not business license, I'm sorry, a building permit fee in the city of Charleston. Now we were able to do it on our business license fee, but we were not able to do it. We had to go to the state to be able to put a 3% fee on building permits that would go directly towards affordable housing. I think that needs a little bit more push on that, because the state adjusted on the TIF funds. That's why you're able to see some TIF funds being able to use to acquire land for affordable housing. That's a recent victory for affordable housing on the state level. So we got some push on the drainage funds with accommodation sales tax. We still need to push on the state side, but I still think our legal department needs to look at it from a home rule department, because, if you're in Estill, South Carolina, if you're in the city of Estill, you don't have an affordable housing problem. You don't have an affordable housing problem in Walterboro. So I can see the state legislators, senators and whatnot around the rural areas of states saying, hey, we don't need another tax increase as such. I think that's a home rule. Just like if you want to do a local option sales tax, fine, do it. So if our legal department can look at home rule when it comes to business license, not business license, building permit fees, find out about that.
I'll be glad to ask. We do have to have authority from the state to add taxes and fees for the most part, but I'll be happy to inquire.
Thank you.
Anything else to bring before the committee?
Councilman Appel.
Councilman Appel?
I was just going to say, unfortunately, home rule stops in South Carolina when it comes to taxes and fees, and it's very unfortunate. And Councilman Waring hit the nail on the head. I mean, I'll give you an example. The city of Miami, they had a little thing called a stormwater and a sea level rise problem. They passed a 1 cent sales tax and were able to bond almost $1 billion for infrastructure improvements. We can't do that. We don't have the authority to do that in the city of Charleston. Just one example, and it's very unfortunate. And we're at 6:25 on a community development committee meeting, but this is a huge issue that will predominate our lives here in the city of Charleston and in Columbia and in Greenville and all the large cities in the state. And we got to find a way to make some progress on this, because our state, unfortunately, is still running the operating system of, I don't know if it's the 20th century or the 19th century, but it's got to get with the times, because we need more flexibility to solve our problems in the state. But that's way above my pay grade. But you're hitting the nail on the head on the issue, and we should explore all of our options that we have under existing authority.
Absolutely.
Like our state legislators should come on and try to work with the various cities and try to change some of those things when they seem to have problems. That's just a thought,
Ask forgiveness.
Well,
Adjournment.
do you have any other questions? If not, we can move to adjournment.
All right.
Thank you.